Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Today is January 15th, 2021. We are halfway through January already. It's been a hell of a month. A lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. And I'm sure you guys have too. So the topic of the hour is social media. And, I've made a few videos about it. And what's really fun is that whenever you tweet anything, there's about a 50% chance crypto media is going to pick it up. Of course, they never get it right. So there's all these articles floating around about us building a decentralized Twitter or, competing with Twitter or building a social network. And at the moment, we're not doing that. We are internally looking. We have a lot of research projects. As many of you know, my company has almost 300 people in it. And about 100 work full-time every day on Cardano, and they do great work. We have people all across the spectrum who do work everywhere else. We have people work in zero-knowledge cryptography. We have people who work in reputation systems and rating systems. We do work in voting systems. And we actually do think about media. We do think about things like artificial intelligence and the veracity of information. We do think a lot about ratings. We do think a lot about proper information propagation and concepts like meaningful participation. And one of the most prominent things that we've been working on has been Catalyst. Now, Catalyst is a very unique piece of software because it's social software. And in itself, it's its own social network. We have more than 5,000 people working within the IdeaScale platform, augmented by a modified fork of Jormungandr with specialized voting tools, where people propose ideas, they rise to the challenges that are given, and they actually vote to fund real projects. And 11 have been funded with the closing of Fund 2, thanks to the tireless work of Dor and his team and the many people in the community who have participated. Now, that platform continues to grow, and it's probably going to have at least 8 or 9 funds, I think, throughout this year, if not more, and they keep growing in size. In fact, the very next one, I think, is approaching $1 million, and they'll just continue to grow in scope and level of participation. And so there you have ratings, social accountability, human interaction, the discussion of complex ideas, and then actual democratic processes to allow things to rise to the top and some things to fall and not get approved. And of course, you have toxic behavior. Those who haven't gotten funded, perhaps they get very angry about it, or maybe some people think that the process is not as inclusive as it needs to be. So you actually have to have built within that system resilience and the ability to overcome that criticism. So those social dynamics, those information flows, those discussions that occur are the bread and butter of a social network. And this happens to be a democratic social network in that it's used for consent of the governed to fund projects. But you could reapply those foundational tools that we're developing with Catalyst to other social networks. And we've been talking about that. We've been thinking about that. It's no coincidence that I've been in the space for so long that I've seen things like Bats, and I've seen things like Steam, and I've seen things like Hive, and we've seen Gab, and we've seen Mastodon, and we've seen many efforts that exist to talk about decentralized social media. And really, what you have to do when you think about a model like that is you have to ask, well, what is productive? Okay, so I like special purpose social networks like a voting network or a network for science or a network, for example, like Stack Exchange for the curation and development of code and asking questions and Q&A systems because you have a purpose for being there, and there are things that are on topic versus things that are off topic. The challenge with general purpose social media is that nothing is off limits and everybody's there and everybody's interacting. And there's a blending of your social life with your family life, with your religious life, with your work life. And it's not really clear where all those boundaries are. And then people come in, they try to curate it. And it's just not working well for anyone. And so it's one of the things that society has gotten to where we're having difficulty. And what's happening is that instead of these networks elevating us, increasing our collective empathy and wisdom, these networks giving us access to more and better information, it's actually causing us to get more divided. It's reducing our empathy for people and tolerance of people. It's making us behave in ways that we would never behave if we were talking to a person in person to their face. And overall, what's happening is we're seeing a grand radicalization of people throughout society. Okay? And it's gotten to the point where we're not listening to each other anymore. We're prejudging people very rapidly. We're taking very shallow appraisals. We create strawman parodies of those things and people we don't like, and then we attack them, and we live in different realities. I blame social media for this, and I blame the algorithms that guide it, and I blame broken incentive models for that. So it's not good enough just to say, let's build something decentralized. Because let's say you do that, and you don't have the right social dynamics, the right tools for discussion, the right ability to promote information flows and curate information, and things to de-radicalize people. What you're going to end up doing is just creating echo chambers. So you'll end up having lots of these little social networks, and each and every one of them will have a particular opinion. It just so happens that Twitter is an example of that. It's a very left-leaning social network, and it is populated by the elites of society, the media, Fortune 500 companies, politicians, and it's an echo chamber. So everything in trending is anti-Republican and anti-right. There's really nothing there on a day-to-day basis when I go, in my experience, reading these things that has anything positive to say about anything other than a particular political philosophy. So you can type in any right-leaning person, regardless of who they are. They can win a Nobel Prize. They can cure cancer. If they happen to not have the right politics, there's just going to be an echo chamber of 50,000, 60,000 tweets saying how horrible they are as a human being and a person. There's no value in a social network like that to society, because even if you happen to agree with those politics, there's no nuance in the conversation. There's no acknowledgement that you're talking about a human being. There's no discussion that perhaps this person's not evil or disgusting or terrible. It's a dog pile, however, on just how bad a person is. So you're not really going to build bridges, and it just forces everybody to just pick their sides. If you try to stop it, you get dogpiled as well. So either you stay silent or you condone it. And if you happen to be on the receiving side, it makes you really angry that people are treating you so unfairly. So you just generalize every single person who happens to have those beliefs and put them into one category. You label them as intolerant. And so as a consequence, we stop listening to each other. We stop trying to understand each other. We stop trying to collaborate with each other. And you see the cycle go on and on and on and get worse and worse and worse. So it makes no sense at all to attempt to create a decentralized social network unless you solve the bigger problem of how do you de-radicalize people and promote effective communication and collective empathy amongst people. That's where you start. And it doesn't matter if the platform's centralized or decentralized. Decentralization reinforces resilience and prevents censorship, but it in no way gives you utility or social benefit to any of these things. Okay? All it does is just prevent you from being deplatformed, but there's no use to the network if the network just talks about one thing. It would be beautiful is for any event I could get in one place a diverse set of opinions, well balanced, with consensus on the facts and circumstances of the event. We can't get that anymore. If someone gets shot by the police in the United States, how that is going to be reported has nothing to do with the facts and circumstances and everything to do with who that person is and what group they belong to. That's the reality that we live in. And people's opinion about that is pretty fixed. That's a problem of propaganda, and it is just a terrible, terrible reality, and it's so incredibly dehumanizing. And you go to any event, economic events, environmental catastrophes like lead in the water, to oil spills, you can go down to even forest fires. And based upon where it happened, the politics and these types of things, everything gets interpreted one way or the other. I would love to have objective reality where an event happens, and before we talk about opinion, before we talk about how to analyze this and talk about how society is so horrible, we can just get a baseline of what actually happened. And what do we know for certainty? What is the difference between objective reality and subjective opinion? We don't get that anymore in mass media. Everything is through a lens in a spectrum. My industry is a great example of that. For over 12 years, we've had to endure relentless media criticism of cryptocurrencies. I remember the early days of Bitcoin. Any mention of Bitcoin had to be followed by used for drugs, terrorism, child pornography, the purchase of illegal goods. You could go to every article written about Bitcoin from 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012 by mainstream media, and it had to include at least a tacit acknowledgement that that's the primary use case of our industry. We're a $1 trillion industry that now central banks are taking reserves in, and many of the wealthiest people in the world hold, and is fundamentally changing the way that the world financial systems work. But in the beginning, 4 years, all of us in the Bitcoin movement had to live with the association that any time Bitcoin was mentioned, we were either condoning child pornography, condoning weapons dealing, condoning drug trafficking, or some other nefarious activity. And there was no apologies, hundreds of obituaries written. This was the media response. It was unbelievable to me. We'd always try to talk about the good things. How instantaneous settlement, probably a good idea. The fundamental changes to identity and property rights and so forth, none of that mattered. The only narrative that mattered were those negative things. And over time, the narrative changed and certain things became socially acceptable. Now I am seeing the same thing done to any discussion about an alternative platform for discussion and de-radicalization. You support Nazis, white supremacists, violence, terrorism. If you have the audacity to say anything that competes with Facebook, Twitter, and social media is a good idea in principle. This is no way to run a society. This is no way to run reality. We will not survive as a species without catastrophic war and death if we are incapable of finding common threads and listening to each other, and our ideologies and our opinions, not based in fact, but propaganda, lead us. Every time that's happened, it's led to disaster in human history. The weapons are better, there's more of us, and the technology is far more advanced. The destruction we can wreak upon each other is so vast now, and the stakes are so much higher now. A small group of people with access to good labs and a little bit of knowledge could create the next pandemic with a 30% mortality rate if they wanted to within the next 20 years. Not to mention all the other horrors that technology is going to produce. If you create systems that all they do is radicalize, and then you make decisions to isolate entire cliques of your population and make them feel that they have no voice, no political representation, no place in society, and that violence is the only answer, guess what? You're going to get exactly what you paid for and what you created, violence. It's just that simple. We've seen this across the arc of history in every marginalized group or perceived marginalized group. And at some point, it breaks. And so we as a society, we stand and have to ask ourselves, where's the wisdom in any of these things? The whole cryptocurrency space taught us that we can do things differently. We don't have to ask for permission to be our own bank. We don't have to ask for permission to store value that doesn't decay every year as the government continues to print trillions of dollars. We don't have to ask permission to pay people abroad for the services that they perform for us and the products that they make for us. We don't have to ask permission to be our own payment system. We don't have to ask permission to create our own legal systems. We don't have to ask permission to create our own securities or our own commodities or our own lending services or insurance services. We can just go do that. And somehow, through the magic of the invisible hand of an actual, true, real free market, regulated by code, not man, it somehow just works out. And no violence or force or threats of force are involved in any way, shape, or form. So isn't it logical that if we have been able to go from nothing under massive criticism and debate to a $1 trillion industry, that the very same techniques and tools could be applied to civil discourse with just a little bit more magic of cryptography and a little bit more care made to how things should be put together? Seems logical to me. Seems like it's a good idea to me. Yet people are so stuck in their propaganda that this actually seems to be, in many cases, a difficult leap. I think it's a natural extension. And we've learned so much from these experiments like Hive and Steam and Bats and so forth. Everything about how do you monetize information? How do you monetize the collection and distribution of data and the micro-targeting of consumers for commercial activity, to how do you create marketplaces? We've learned a huge amount from OpenBazaar, to how do you create better primitives for privacy, as we've seen and learned with things like Zcash and Monero and Dash, to things like how do you identify people in a decentralized way, as we've seen with self-sovereign identity, to how do you vote and curate and rate things, and how do you incentivize people to pay attention over a longer term instead of a shorter term. These are fundamental capabilities that we are systematically as an industry building in an open source way with no patents, and no overriding agency or authority, no intellectual property. They're open to the commons. They're free for every single person. And, you see projects like Jack Dorsey says, we're going to do blue sky. I don't care if it's an open source project. I don't care if they have 5 developers or whatever the hell they've hired working on that. Nothing there will actually turn into anything good, because that entire mindset is wrong. It's not about freedom. It's not about finding a way to evolve the discourse to include empathy and wisdom, and try to create a diversity of opinions, and try to get to objective reality as a starting point. It's just, there's a wave here, and let's try to extend what we've already done as long as it fits within the California groupthink that we already have. And if we have any audacity to move away from that, then it's a cesspool of pick your favorite pejorative: white supremacists, Nazis, Al-Qaeda terrorists, drug dealers, and so forth. You see, the advantage of being one of the original people in the cryptocurrency space is I've already been covered in that tar and those feathers. I've already endured the mockery of the media. I've already been called crazy by my family members and friends and associates and so forth. I don't care about being a pariah or an exile, because that was never what it was about. It's not about making people happy or fitting in society. It's about looking to the future and asking yourself, is it moral when you see a potential future that results in death, chaos, catastrophe, and terrible outcomes for the majority of us, to just allow that to happen when you have a potential to stand up and speak and say something about it? Germany just in Berlin unveiled a monument to, I believe it was over 90 lawmakers during the Weimar Republic who stood up and opposed Hitler. And this came at great personal cost. I believe all of them were systematically executed over the coming years as retribution for standing up against the Nazi Party. And rightly so, the German people decided to honor them and say these people have courage. In our own minds, we all would like to believe we come from that group. But the reality is, most of us don't. That's a truth that we have to acknowledge. Even the people in that group, we're not in that group for all things. Some of them didn't speak up against racism. Some of them didn't speak up for equal rights for women. Some of them didn't speak up when relatives abused other relatives. They just stayed silent. So yes, in that particular event that they did, but it's human nature to want to get along and belong. It's human nature for us to try to accommodate the unreasonable. The vast majority of people in the United States in 1850 had either a negative to an abolitionist view of slavery, including people in the southern states. The people who benefited from it, the landowners, of course, were very pro-slavery, but the rank and file either were ambivalent or they at least would acknowledge it's a distasteful profession. Very few would publicly stand up against it because they were afraid of the social consequences of it. This is the fundamental problem with why we continue to regress into totalitarianism and tyranny and the control of the few and sacrifice our freedoms and liberties as a society. It's because in our own minds, we think that we can stand up, but in reality, we often don't. And we're afraid of being criticized. We're afraid of appearing as the other, as one of the crazies, as one of the people on the outside. And the problem is that society is built in the way that the ones who do stand up, who win, they get indoctrinated. They get wealth rewards. They get things that matter to them. They get famous. And then the next time that they're called upon to go out there and stand up, they have something to lose. They have something that they care about more than their principles and their ideas, and they don't want to give away. Might be the relationships they're in, might be the money in their bank account, might be the social status they've gained as a hero. So they stay quiet the second time. We have to figure out as a society how we grow beyond that. We have to figure out as a society how we can have real conversations with each other about ethics and morality and the objectivity or subjectivity thereof. We have to figure out as a society how we can separate the objective from the subjective. We have to figure out as a society what are fundamental human rights in the 21st century and what are not. And we have to be willing to get uncomfortable in these conversations. We have to be willing to entertain that perhaps the values and notions that we have are not necessarily the only values and notions that matter, and in some cases may be totally wrong. If we are incapable of doing that, we will never be able to evolve to the next level. And the problem is there's a gap forming. The technology evolves too quickly now. And we keep adding capabilities the human race frankly should not have unless it is paired with good judgment and good wisdom. Just like we invent the safety belt after we invent the car and crash a car. Similarly, all these new things that are coming, we're not prepared for. We were, as a society, not prepared for the consequences of the internet and social media. But here we are, and we're now starting to see the end results of these things. The unraveling of society, the radicalization of society, and so forth. So the highest pursuit is the self-awareness of the problems that are before us and the humility to admit that perhaps we don't have the answers to solve them yet, and to ask for help. So my life's work has to be about waking up every day and confronting these problems head on and admitting, well, we don't have solutions to them, having the courage to pursue attempts, even if those attempts fail, understanding that at times it makes me a pariah, and at times it makes me look like one of the crazy ones. And what's so magical about what we've accomplished with Cardano, Ethereum, and other things that I've been involved in is it has attracted literally millions of people, to start thinking this way too. And that alone has removed any dimension of cynicism from me. And it's put me in a situation where I honestly believe that as bad as these things will be, and the things that will come, and the things that could go wrong, that we as a society will find a way to get out of it. Not by the bold leadership of a single visionary person, but rather by the collective swarm of millions of frustrated but passionate people who want to do things differently, and now have been empowered to do so because they've tasted the tools of freedom and liberty. These protocols we build are not about money. They're not about making you rich. They've never been about that, because in the beginning, they didn't have those capabilities. Bitcoin was worthless. These protocols that we build are about inviting each and every person who uses them just for a moment to realize that we have a chance to evolve as a society and do things differently, think differently, interact differently, entertain completely new business models, ignore the "it doesn't work that way," or "that's just not how humans work," or "no one will let you," or whatever conspiratorial thinking of the week convinces you that some unknown power will prevent you. It's to say, you know what? I'm going to live in the present. I'm going to use it and just find a way to make this work. And each and every one of us has a small part, a small piece, a small brick in this wall, but together we can build anything. So in the coming years, yeah, we definitely will do something in social media. Don't know when. We're thinking about it. We have people in my company that every day wake up and this is what they do, myself included, in addition to a lot of other things that I work on a daily basis. And one day we'll be able to come up with a protocol that we feel actually can solve real problems. And of course we'll launch that and we'll see what happens with it. It may succeed, it may fail, but it will inspire countless thousands, if not millions, just as Cardano has done and inspired so many to say perhaps we can contribute too. And I believe that the collective whole, working directed and tirelessly over a long enough time, will get us out of all of this and end the oligarchy of Silicon Valley and end all this centralization of information and power and control. And the world will be a better place, a wiser place, and we'll all have a little bit more empathy. And that is a good life. Don't know how long we have to work at this before we'll actually solve it. Could take 50 years, could take 60 years. But what the hell else am I going to do? Honestly, what the hell else can any of us do? What kind of a world would we live in if we don't solve these problems? One where we're not allowed to have our own opinions and thoughts. We live in constant fear of offending someone in power, so we say nothing. There was a whole society that endured that fate during the 20th century. There is a reason why people in Russia are incredibly careful with their friends and their opinions. It's a cultural thing because they were reminded for decade after decade after decade by a government that didn't care about any humanity that by sharing those opinions, there will be consequences if they're inconvenient to people you've never met and know very little about. I don't want to live in a world where that becomes the standard across the world. And it is for billions of people today, right here, right now. It is our duty as humans who care about each other and want to live in a great society that we transcend these things. So each and every one of us must work towards that end if we want to live a good life. If not for ourselves, then for those we leave behind and for those things we do care about. And if anything, because it's challenging and it's an unending task. That's the point of these protocols. It's a reminder to all those who would believe that this time they can dominate and control forever for our greater good, that the only greater good is to put everyone in charge of their own lives and for us to live well together. So I just wanted to make a quick video about this and talk about this. I think it's one of the most important topics our industry has ever broached. And we have been, as an industry, for over a decade, mentioning this, and it's the first time ever that people are really starting to pay attention, usually because their favorite political voice has been deplatformed. I have to admit, I was deeply saddened when I heard that Ron Paul, an 85-year-old man who's harmless, was deplatformed from Facebook. After so much outrage occurred that Facebook had the gall to say it was a mistake and walk it back. No, it wasn't. They just decided they didn't want that fight today. But I firmly believe they'll indulge it someday later when there's less scrutiny. It's not about the people who are deplatformed in the moment, whether you think they're good people or bad people. It's about the fact that these networks cannot find a way to admit these people and make them productive, or at least expose the issues they have and de-radicalize the people around them. That's a failure of the platform, and silencing people accomplishes nothing. You don't cut a man's tongue out unless you're afraid of what he has to say. It's just that simple. All right, so just a quick video on that, and I hope it brings some clarity. No social network is coming soon. It's something we're thinking about, and we'll continue thinking about it. And as Catalyst evolves, it's a brick. As Prism evolves, it's a brick. As Cardano evolves, it's another brick. As privacy technology evolves, that's another brick. A lot to talk. And of course, we're in dialogues with Minds and Gab and all these other people. We know people at all these ventures, and they tell us what they're doing and what they're not doing and what they've learned and problems that are occurring. And of course, we think about the social dynamics. And of course, we think about the governance. And of course, we read Alex Pentland's work and talk about social physics and all these things. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of places to aggregate. But it's a lifelong effort if one actually wants to do it well. And it's all of our effort. Thanks for listening.